Hello everyone, and welcome to this video on a brief introduction to Skaven. My name is OpenTrap, and I'm making this for my Discord, which is OpenTrap's Total War Warhammer and Used Cars Sales Lot. We are a small-ish community, and we focus on narrative Warhammer 3 multiplayer campaigns. And I'm going to go over this to help some of the newer players in the server, players who aren't familiar with how to play Skaven. This guide isn't meant to be anything specific, but rather it's meant to be a general overview so that the players in my server can understand their mechanics and what tools they have available, and then they can decide for themselves and have their own voice in how they want to play out their campaigns, rather than have it be dictated by someone a bit more experienced telling them exactly what's optimal and what's not. So, to start, it's important to understand how the Skaven want to fight their battles, because that will inform all the other decisions that you make. It'll inform what kind of army compositions you make versus which opponents, what kind of buildings you prioritize, technology, so on and so forth. So the important thing to understand with Skaven and the way they fight is that they are a horde faction, which is capable of bringing insane firepower and a lot of tricks into the battle. Regardless of the playstyle, however, you should remember that every single Skaven unit, no matter what it is expendable. No rat's life is worth more than the effort it would take to save it. And you can kind of see by these bullet points here, not really bullet points, but you get the picture. These are sort of the mantra that you should have when playing a Skaven, which is numbers, ambushes, warpstone, and firepower. So I'm going to cover the different categories of units, because I believe that understanding the role and jobs of all the different types of units can kind of help better inform you on what you want to do and provide the context that you need to sort of make your own decisions. And the first one I want to cover is the chaff units that Skaven have. This covers your Skaven slaves and clan rats, and these guys aren't meant for killing, so don't even try and make them a killing force. Their whole job is to get in the way, and that's it. And really, the only difference between the two is that the Skaven slaves are much cheaper than the clan rats, but the clan rats are even better at getting in the way. They have better melee defense, better leadership. They can take a bit more damage, they can take a bit more punishment, and they'll stick in the fight a bit longer before they rout. Whereas the Skaven slaves are going to melt shortly after contact with the enemy, especially if the enemy is something that can hit hard and hit fast. Don't worry too much about killing off your own units through friendly fire and whatnot. Killing your own units, especially the chaff, or really anything that you have, is acceptable for Skaven, because you're also going to be killing whatever unit that they're bogging down, and whatever the enemy is losing is probably worth a lot more than what you're losing. And I would just like to say that, in my personal opinion, and I know a lot of people disagree with me, my preferred chaff unit for a large portion of the early game is going to be the Skaven Slave Slingers, because while they are by far the worst unit at actually holding back the enemy, they can do some damage with their slings, whereas the other Skaven slaves are probably going to do absolutely no damage whatsoever, and they're still all going to die. They're still all going to rout. They can all get in the way. So maybe by doing a little bit of damage before they rout, as the enemy approaches them, you can get a bit more use out of them in that way. Next are the weapons teams and the artillery. This is what I call the Clan Scryer Special, and these units are the real killing units that most Skaven clans are going to be using, and you should integrate them into nearly all of your armies, at least only a couple. You don't have to have an entire army of these, but even just a couple are really important in making sure that you can actually deal damage to the enemy. Every weapons team is incredibly powerful, and they can complement all of your army compositions in some sort of way. The chaff exists to hold the enemy in place for these units exactly. They will, in all due likelihood, also kill your own chaff, but who cares about that anyways, right? Chaff is there to die for you. You can choose to maximize the number of these powerful units or minimize the number of blocking units, but in that case, you're kind of gambling that you can do enough damage before the enemy closes the distance and starts tearing these guys apart in melee. Against players with real human brains, you should probably carefully position these guys and spread them out, because unlike the AI, players will figure out ways to get a single unit that breaks through your back line to tie down multiple units in melee. So, don't expect that the player's going to play like the AI and just choose to get caught up on your blocking units. They'll try and get around them. And a special note for weapons teams is that the drill team that you have, these guys can smash down walls and gates really fast, but they're pretty bad in a fight. However, they do have some special abilities. These abilities allow them to hold the enemy unit in place, literally. It's like an AoE snare around them. So enemies can't move past them, and it gives you an opportunity to have your weapons teams light them up. And they're also pretty tanky and heavily armored, so they can actually survive a lot of that friendly fire that's coming in. And then they also have an AoE damage over time ability. And if you use them well, they can actually really carry your army. But don't expect them to do all the killing or a whole lot of damage. They're more of a support team for your weapons team rather than doing anything else. Next, we have stealth units. Stealth units are probably my favorite part of the roster as a whole. I really like playing as Clan Eshin. Um, and even if you're tactically challenged, you're not very good at, commanding armies and doing tactic strategy, all that kind of stuff. Even just having a single one of these in your army can really create a tough choice for your opponent, just due to the uncertainty that they sort of introduce to the battle. Having them in your back line and waiting for the right moment to use them, it can really throw your opponent's plans out of whack. For starters, the Death Runners are a very powerful and fast-moving infantry unit that can be a surprise source of damage or support. They can typically be used in one of three ways. The first is a surprise support piece. If you keep them stealth in your back line and you see a point in your front line where you need support, you can rush them in through your line and use their ability, the Weeping Blade, to reduce the enemy's armor there, which will allow your units on the front line, maybe you have some Storm Vermin or something up there, to dish out a bit more damage to the enemy. The second is as a surprise flanker. They can stay hidden until the time is right and use their speed and stealth to move around the flank, charge the enemy in the rear, and start rolling up the line. And the last way is as a backfield hunter. And sort of like the hidden flanker, you rely on their speed and their stealth, and you focus on attacking missile units and artillery crews, which they can tear apart surprisingly fast. They will crush them very quickly. They do a lot of damage, despite having only a small amount of units, actually, or a small number of entities in the unit. The enemy can't see them coming, and by the time they do see them, it's too late. They're already going to be on top of them. They're really fast, and so they're going to just lose their missile units before they have a chance to actually do anything about it. They have really strong damage potential, and basically anything you throw them at, they will do damage. But if the enemy is capable of fighting back, then you definitely want to support them because they'll die just as fast as they kill the enemy. And there's only a couple guys in that unit, so your unit will probably get wiped out first. Eshin Triads are the more defensive version of the Death Runners. They don't have much in the way of offensive punch, but their charge reflect and bonus versus large means that they are a very good surprise wall of pikes versus cavalry, and they can be sort of a surprise ambush or a surprise roadblock to enemy large units that are trying to get into your backline. And they'll do really good damage against large units thanks to their bonus versus large. If the enemy has any large units in their backfield, they can also be used in a similar way as Death Runners to try and get back there and hunt them down. Maybe they have like a large artillery piece or some missile cavalry or something that you want to jump on, and they'll kill them very fast. Finally, there's the Gutter Runners. They are stealth missile units, and they can be used to ambush enemy skirmishing units, such as missile cavalry or flying cavalry. They can bring surprise firepower to a flank where the enemy wasn't expecting it, and they can even flank the enemy front line by sneaking around the sides and shooting them in the back. So all of these units offer you a lot of tactical flexibility, and they can also be used to surprise the enemy, create uncertainty on the battlefield, and they can really carry your army and win battles for you in ways that are unexpected. Next, we have the Molder Monsters. The Molder Monsters are your fast-moving, powerful units, and they have a couple uses. The first is that they can be used as a line breaker. If you send them forward to disrupt the enemy, slow down their formations while your weapons team pour in the fire, and then your elite infantry units can exploit the broken formations. That's one tactic that can really sort of cause issues for your opponents, maximize the damage that you do before they get there, slow them down, and it can really make your opponents fear seeing these units on the battlefield. Another thing they can do is rear charge the enemy front line once they've engaged yours, and they can support your front line troops by disrupting those formations, doing a bunch of damage with the rear charges, and causing them a lot of problems. They can peel units off to reposition your weapons teams or your specialists, your stealth units, what have you. And then you can also use their speed and their bulk to break into the enemy backline and chase down their missile units to make sure that you can win any sort of missile trades. And then finally, some of the more powerful units can also be used to duel enemy monsters, lords, and heroes. And then we have the Doom Flayers and the Doom Wheels. These units are mobile can openers, and they are tougher than your fast-moving infantry and monsters with more armor. They're meant to cycle charge, and they specialize against infantry, especially armored infantry. And one thing I want to touch upon that I didn't touch upon was the elite infantry, such as Storm Vermin, Plague Monks, and the like. They're a lot better than Clan Rats, but they typically aren't as good as the equivalent of other factions. However, Storm Vermin are pretty tanky for the Skaven. They can fight back decently well, especially when they're buffed by supporting units in magic. Plague Monks are sort of the offensive version, and they work sort of like the Death Runners from before, but there's more entities, so they don't melt as quickly, but they still die very fast. You have armor-piercing versions, and you have anti-infantry versions, but they are really good at cutting through chaff units in particular and breaking open hard parts of the enemy line, especially when they fight in conjunction with either your own chaff or your Storm Vermin. And these units can be used to exploit broken formations caused by your magic, artillery, or monsters, pick apart the enemy front line, and if the enemy tries to bypass them, they can do considerable damage in retaliation. Now, let's talk about ambushing for a second. Ambushing is one of the most important mechanics for Skaven. Skaven do not fight fair, and neither should you. Not only can the Skaven ambush offensively with their stock stance, which is very powerful, but you can also ambush defensively by having the enemy come to you. Another way to ambush your opponent is to hide an army inside of a settlement, and if the enemy hasn't officially discovered the settlement as belonging to you, then the army that's garrisoned in there won't be visible to them on the campaign map, and then it can pop out and attack them in a way that they won't be expecting. Last of all, even in a battle, you can ambush the enemy using your stealth units that have been Vanguard deployed or snuck around to an advantage spot to launch a surprise attack and exploit chaos and confusion. Don't underestimate how often players forget about units that they can't see once the battle starts. The next thing I want to talk about is food. Food is a critical resource for the Skaven, and you should always strive to keep it maxed out. But that being said, there are many occasions where spending your food is worth it. For starters, getting a city to a higher tier is very important because it lets you skip having to wait for growth. For the cost of 120 food, you can upgrade a city to tier 5. It's a very smart idea to focus early on maximizing food capacity and food generation so that you can take a city at tier 5 as quickly as possible. Later in the game, taking a tier 4 or 5 settlement near the front lines will let you set up a forward recruitment area. You can also spend food on using additional menace belows, which can really help tip a fight in your favor. However, don't waste food willy-nilly. You need it to keep growth and public order high. There is some argument to also be made to just try and take every settlement you can at tier 3, but again, it's important to sort of keep an idea of what that's going to do to your food stockpiles. Tier 3, especially for the major settlements, is when you can start building your reactors, which I'll get to in a little bit on the economy section. So just keep in mind, your food, you shouldn't waste it, but you shouldn't be afraid to spend it either. Undercities are a cool part of the Skaven faction, but I wouldn't worry too much about them, especially in the campaign that we're playing, where the map is very limited. You're not going to be able to spread them out outside of where you're going to be fighting. You can build them inside of enemy or neutral settlements to steal food, make money, or even prepare that area for an assault to support armies that might march in, or have the Skaven Tide pop up and take over the settlement, or you can build a nuke in the settlement and destroy it. Just keep in mind that these can be discovered and destroyed by your opponent, and all the money you spent them will be lost. And if you do take a settlement that has an undercity in it, you'll also lose the undercity. But they are very important tools that can be used properly to give yourself quite an advantage over the enemy. This next part is going to be the economy. The economy for Skaven is actually very strong, surprisingly strong, because their dedicated eco buildings don't really do much compared to other factions. However, all of your buildings, including your recruitment buildings and garrisons, can make you money. And the key to maximizing the money that you make is by building the arcane generators in every single major settlement you have, as these will give you a massive boost to your income and even at the highest tiers, generate you some food. For this reason, it might be worth taking every capital settlement that you capture at tier 3 and spending the food on that, just so that you can get those arcane generators set up. For this last part, I want to create some example armies and show them off so that some of the newer players can see what's possible with Skaven, and maybe have some directions they want to try out and practice with to see what they like and suits them. And the first example army here is the weapons team with Chaff. And I would say this is the most common and simple to understand army. You use a strong core of weapons teams and artillery to do all the killing, and the rest of the army exists solely to get in the way of the enemy long enough so that your weapons teams can actually kill them. This comp has a lot of strong range damage, but it is vulnerable to being rushed down. Expect clan rats and a healthy mix of rattling guns, Jezzails, and a few short range weapon teams like the Globadiers or the Warp Fire Throwers, and maybe some drills put in there to snare the enemy and add a little bit of extra support. The next one is the Sneaky Surprise Army list. This is my favorite. This army comp focuses on utilizing your stealth units to their greatest effect, and it's a very Eshin style list. You can use lots of Death Runners, Night Runners, and Triads to bring sneaky damage to wherever you need it. I would include Clan Rats, Storm Vermin, and Weapons teams as needed to round out the list, because if you aren't playing as Clan Eshin, this is pretty fragile. And Clan Eshin, their Slinger units are actually extremely powerful with armor piercing, but you don't have any good ranged armor piercing options if you're not playing Clan Eshin unless you bring in the weapons teams. Consider a small core of 4 to 5 Storm Vermin or 4 to 5 weapons teams to anchor the army and gain the enemy's attention, give them something to focus on so that they aren't paying attention to where your sneaky units might be. And then you can use them to flank, disrupt, ambush, and cause havoc for the enemy. Then we have the Monster Mash. This is the Clan Molder style of army. It uses a main core of monsters to dish out damage, disrupt enemy formations, and threaten key targets. It should still be supported by weapons teams who can use the disruption caused by the monsters to chew up vulnerable enemy targets and support the monsters against hard targets that they may struggle against. And I also think that a small group of infantry, such as Clan Rats or Storm Vermin, can also be very useful to guard the weapons teams, anchor the army, or support the monsters as they push into the enemy formation. And next would be the Army of Specialists. This utilizes the Storm Vermin and the Plague Monks and whatnot to be the main line holder, flankers, and damage dealers. You can use Doom Flayers as well, and Doom Wheels to get into the back line, disrupt formations, run over the infantry. A few weapons teams are also very useful to provide pressure at range, especially with the artillery, forcing the enemy to come to you, softening up hard targets. Maybe they have some monsters that you can shoot down. So the Specialist is another sort of format that you can use, and this might be something that like Clan Wars might use due to all of the Storm Vermin in there. And then last of all is the little bit of everything. With this army composition, you put everything, a unit for all the different categories together in one giant army to see what happens. You have some chaff to hold, weapons teams to kill from afar, some sneaky units to surprise the enemy, Storm Vermin to block, get in the way, and fight in the drag out melee battles, Plague Monks to cut apart the infantry, so on and so on. This army doesn't necessarily have a solid game plan, but still very powerful, just thanks to the sheer power of the units within. And the enemy might even be overwhelmed by the sheer diversity of it, but it does require that the person controlling the army be adaptable and creative to make it work. Its biggest strength and weakness is that it doesn't have a solid game plan. It can do just about anything, but it doesn't do anything particularly well. And to take an old quote, if you don't know what you're doing, then the enemy certainly doesn't know what you're doing. And that's it for this intro to Skaven. I appreciate you watching. Again, I'm trying not to give out anything too specific because the purpose of this video is just to introduce the players in my server to the Skaven as a faction and what kind of tools they have available, explain some of the mechanics so that they can go into the campaign and any sort of practice runs they do informed and sort of focus what they want to learn and figure things out for themselves. So I hope to that regard this video is helpful, not just for the people in my server, but for anybody who's watching, in case you're new to Warhammer or you've never played this game before and you're curious, you're interested. If you do want to join us for future campaigns, in the description of my channel, you can find the link to the Discord. And I hope you enjoyed watching this, at least to some degree. I hope it was informative. And last of all, I hope you stay hydrated today and you have a good day. Thank you. Bye-bye.